we're going to be looking at Live and how to set it up. I'm assuming at this point that you've already installed it and you have an icon somewhere that you can select and it will open Live up. I will do that right now. Here's what Live looks like when you first open it up. It's got 2 MIDI tracks and 2 audio tracks. If you don't see all that, don't worry. It happens on different ways on different computers. Sometimes it's just one of each, and it's supposed to be this way, but it might not be. So let's go through each section, and I will show you where things are so you can navigate around. Okay, this on the left side here is your libraries. It has various things in here: sounds, drums, instruments, audio effects, MIDI effects. I've got Max for Live, which you won't have. It's got a plugins, and then it's got clips and samples. Down here are favorite places that you can add a folder to your particular song that you're working on for access to it in a very quick manner. These over here are what shows up when you click on one of these over here. So for example, let's go to instruments. I've got analog, collision, drum rack, electric, external, and so on. So those are the instruments that I have. Audio effects, you should have a full complement of these with your freebie one. You've got effects racks, which I will explain at some future date. We have auto filter, auto pan, beat repeat, and all these various effects here. There's a whole pile of them, and they're generally pretty good in terms of quality. Okay, this area over here is called the track area. This is where you create your tracks, audio or MIDI tracks, until your CPU can't handle any more of them. I've had as many as 48 of them going at once, and it works out fine. So what you're seeing down here is the mixer area. Every time you add a track, it will have these controls for volume and pan. And well, here's volume, here's pan, here's the arm. That's to tell the track it's going to record. We're going to leave that off for now. Here's the play and mute button. You could see that it turns to a gray color and you weren't hearing any audio because that track is muted. So we're going to go ahead and leave that one on. Down here is the track area where you see each individual cell's contents. Here is a MIDI track. I double click on it and you can see that there's bars, and each one of these will be a note. We can actually put in notes by double clicking on a given note, and that will represent, say, a kick and a snare and a hi-hat and so on. Or with the synthesizer, it'll be these actual notes right here. So I'm going to go ahead and erase those things. And then here in the audio section, we don't have any audio loaded up yet, so we're going to go ahead and grab something to put in here so that we can play along with it. The way we do that is we go over here to our library area, and I've got a folder that I added, and it shows all my music tracks, my music projects. So I've selected one I call Little Confidences, and I've got some audio here that I will go ahead and drag one of these in, and you drag them to these little cells here. And as you can see, it populated it with this waveform. And when we play it, by hitting this little button here, you'll hear the sound come up. Now I'm going to leave the music way down.
Pleased to make your acquaintance.
So that you can hear me talk over the music.
How are you this evening?
This is just an example, and it's how we will work. I will send you this track. You will populate an audio track with it.
I'm feeling a connection.
And then we'll set up our MIDI and our audio to be set up so that you can play along with it.
Lovely walking with you.
So I'm going to go ahead and hit this down here, and that will stop the track. That's one way to stop a track. If you want to stop a number of tracks all at once, you go down to this area here, and this is the Stop All Tracks button. Okay, these are tracks, and one line of tracks is called a scene. A scene is everything on this line will play. In other words, it's just like same as hitting this button. You can hear it'll start back up again when I hit it. So I hit the scene button, and the loop starts all the way over. Now this is a full song, so we don't have it looped per se.
Pleased to make your acquaintance.
We're going to stop all the tracks, and from here we'll go into the preferences section so that we can set your machine up to recognize your MIDI signal and your audio signals. Okay, we're going to go up to preferences, which is under the live pull down, and it's this second item here. And as you can see, our preferences have shown up. And right now, you've got all these things that we need to set something for. So go up here to the look and feel. And we can set a few things in here that will help us show what we'd like to see on our screen as we work along. I've got the zoom display set at 120% because it makes it bigger for me. And with my eyesight, I have to do that. You can leave all this stuff normal as it's set already, but you can go ahead in here into the skin and select your desired look. And what happens when you click on one of these is I'll switch it to my normal setup, and that's called the light gray. And as you can see, everything out here changed colors. I'll go ahead and try another couple more so you can see what they look like. Okay, that one wasn't very different. That's not very different. Okay, as you can see, it's changing dramatically there and dramatically there. I'm going to go back to this light gray color since it gives me the ability to see things better with my eyesight. So this is my nominal setup. This is what I usually see when I open up a new project. And once you set these preferences, it'll apply to every project that you work with. So that's the look and the feel. There isn't too much more that we really want to mess with right now. Okay, we'll go down to audio. This is an important section. With Macintosh, make sure core audio is selected as opposed to none. So we'll keep that selected. And then down here is where you'll find a list by clicking on this right in here. You'll find a list of devices that you have hooked up. Yours will be either the Scarlett 2 or Focusrite or something along those lines. Hopefully it will give you a very specific name that you'll understand. My particular one is just called generically USB audio codec because I'm using a Xenix mixing board for my ins and outs. You can always use your built-ins if you don't have anything. That would be your ins and outs on your Macintosh, which every Macintosh has. So there we've got the USB audio codec, which is my mixing board. And you can go in here to input configuration and change it to mono, 2 monos, or one stereo. I leave both of these on. I don't really touch these things too much. Then we can say cancel because we don't need to change anything. And you can do the same thing with the output. I'll cancel out of those. As you can see, it's telling us we have 8.32 milliseconds of latency input, 7.32 of output. And if we had this set to 0, which you can always click on these things and then type in the value, as you can see, we've got 15.6 milliseconds of delay time between what we're putting in and what we're hearing. That is pretty unacceptable. That is not going to be a desired amount of delay. You can hear that. It's very disconcerting, and it will not allow you to record accurately along with everything else that's going on in your track. So I'm going to go ahead and set that delay compensation to -16 on my system to try to get it pretty close to 0. Now 0.3 milliseconds is pretty negligible, and we don't have any delay that we need to listen to. Your Scarlett has got a knob on it that tries to do pretty much the same thing as this. It's the mix direct versus USB, and you're going to want to maybe set that somewhere in the middle, that knob in the middle. I don't have one to show you physically, but you're going to want to set that maybe in the middle so that you get a very accurate time if this stuff doesn't get you close enough. In other words, if you hit a drum pad and it takes a fraction of a second to hear, then you're going to have some problems recording. And you can basically compensate for all that stuff in this section in Ableton and then with your knob on your Scarlett. Now, typically this comes with 512 samples. And as you can hear, it's distorted because it's trying to use too much CPU power for the input side of things. So I'm going to go back down to 256. And as you can see, the latency goes up and down when you do that. So I'll go 512 and point that out. And as you can see, the latency went from 0.3 up to 11 just by changing the sample rate. So it has a dramatic effect on things. I would come down to 256. Like I said, it does default to 512 when you get the product. The rest of this stuff down in here, we don't need to be concerned with. Okay, so let's go to our MIDI setup. Down here is where you'll see the Scarlett show up. And if these buttons aren't on, turn them all on. So you've got input. I've got an APC40, which is a controller. I've got my keyboard, Oxygen 49. And I've got a MIDI interface for my guitar controller that I use. And I set all that stuff to on, sync on, and the remote on. Up in this section, this is for control surfaces. Now, I have one control surface, and that's the APC40. So down here, you'll see all of the possible MIDI ports, and up here you'll see all of the control surface items, and there's like a boatload of them that come already with the program. The APC40 is a very popular controller for this setup, so we set the input as well as the output. Okay, so our next one, we'll go to the file folder, and there isn't a whole lot you have to do here, because when you install Ableton, it will select where all these files are for you, and we won't have to do anything to it until we get into moving things around to other drives. So the only important one here is use audio units. We're going to put that on because we're not using VST plugins. VST plugins are for basically the PC, and audio unit plugins are for the Mac. That's the big difference. So we'll come down here to our library, and the same thing applies. We've got installation folder for packs, which you won't have any packs, I don't believe, but it will set it for you, and it will tell you where it is. That way you'll know where things are located on your machine. And these are all set to the my user folder that I set up, and then the Ableton and user library and so on. Let's go to record, warp, and launch. Once again, there's not too many things we're going to set in here. We can use AIFF or Wave. You and I don't need to worry, but if we're working with Dan, he probably needs to have waves. So just keep that in mind if you're working with him or anybody else on a PC. You need to do a wave for them because they can't use AIFs in general, I don't think. Okay, then the next thing is the count in for the bars. I like 2 bars. That's the old standard musical recording process of 2 bars of count in. Some people like 1, some people like it even longer. I'm going to stick with 2. Okay, we're going to go ahead and on this exclusive one here for the arm, we want to just leave it, and same that we go with the solo. That just means that you can only do 1 at a time. The clip update rate, just leave as it is, and leave all the rest of this stuff as it is. The only other thing we're going to change here is the default warp mode. It normally comes in beats, I believe. That's where I think it comes in after installation. We're going to set it to complex. And what warping is a way that Ableton has of timing things. And say you're drumming along and you slow down momentarily because you basically messed up. We can actually go into the audio track and move a couple of warp markers around and speed that sucker right back up to where it belongs. And we can do that with the complex set of controls. The rest of this stuff I just leave the same. And we'll go from there to the CPU. And we're going to have multi-core, multi-processor support. Turn that on because I'm sure that your modern computer's got at least 2 processors, if not more. And then this rewire thing is a whole different subject. We won't even deal with it. Okay, licenses and maintenance. Yours will say Ableton Live Lite or Intro or something like that. And then you'll have no add-ons attached, I don't believe. You'll have to check that one out. We're going to allow it to authorize at Ableton for the installation process. And if you have problems with that whole thing, let me know and I'll run you through it. It's not really part of what I'm trying to do here today. So all the rest of this stuff, I would just leave the same. Okay, so that's our setup in the preferences, and we close it out. And there's just a couple more things we need to get through before we can actually start recording. So one of the first things is that these sends go to different returns. And I don't use sends and returns in Ableton because you can set your effects directly on each channel. I don't really care for the sends. That's the old-fashioned way of doing things. So what we'll do is we'll go down here to the right corner and we'll select our sends and returns, and we'll get rid of them. So when you click on these guys here, you're going to see stuff appear and disappear. Okay, now the really important one is this IO one right here. And that shows us our input or MIDI from input. Mine I've got set to external in, and then channels 1 and 2 on my mixer. Yours will be your Scarlett, so it'll say external in, and then it'll just show you channels 1 and 2, or 1 or 2, as you can see right here. So 1, 2, or 1 and 2. I would always work in stereo. These are the monitoring buttons, and anytime you're doing an input to the system, you'll want to set this to in. And as you can see, it turns this reddish color, and it still functions. It still functions as a mute button, but it turns that color when you've got it set to the input. This is the solo down here, which means that you can click on this and it will only play this track, whatever's on this track. This is the record arm button. Let me select it on here. And that allows us to, along with this button here, allows us to record onto this track. Now, as you can see, you might not have noticed, but as you can see, if we turn this off, these are squares. If you turn them on, they're circles. That means it's armed and ready to record on that track. It will not record on any other track unless you see another circle somewhere that you've set up. Okay, now that our tracks are set up, we've got our audio song that we brought in. This will be what I send to you. Then we've got our MIDI track set up with our input monitor and our MIDI from. Yours will be the Scarlett. And then we have the track armed. Then we have the audio track coming in from the Scarlett, audio from Scarlett. And then the in on the monitor, and the track is armed. So we'll go ahead and do some recording of these two tracks on top of the song track by hitting the master over here on the scene. That will play all of the tracks that are on this line. There's our count in. And as you can hear, we've got the audio and the MIDI coming in. You can see the MIDI.
And how are you this evening?
recording itself right down here.
I don't know what's come over me.
We'll go ahead and check out the audio when we're done recording.
feeling a
Let's just
connection
run
here.
for a second.
Are you feeling it too? It's so lovely walking with you here in the starlight. Does it move you too? I hope so.
Starts off with mind, melts into heart, then the body starts moving. Okay, that should be enough. We can either hit the space bar on the keyboard, or we can go up here to the transports and hit the stop button, which we just did. Okay, so we saw the MIDI track as it was recording, and you can see all these little notes down in here. Those are all the MIDI notes that were recorded. Yours will be on the order of like kick drums and snares and hi-hats and so on. Then we go over to the audio track, and as you can see, it recorded the audio. The level's pretty low, so I'll go ahead and bump it up with this knob right here. And as you can see, it just raises right on up. Now, in order to play back, we have to hit the auto, and we'll just mute this track since we don't want it to play. It's still playing. And when we hit the scene button, it will start to play back what we just recorded.
Hi.
And then we'll go ahead and mix
Pleased to
it.
make your acquaintance. And how are you this evening? I don't know what's come over
And
me, but
that's how we record. You can take
I'm
these
feeling
off
a connection here.
arms so that you don't accidentally
Are you
record.
feeling it too?
Although they won't record if you don't have these set to monitor in.
It's so lovely walking with you here
Now we're in the mixing
in the
phase.
starlight. Does it move you too?
As you
I
can
hope
hear,
so.
everything's completely in time because of the way Ableton handles the tempo, which is shown here, and we can speed it up and slow it down. And everything is still in time with itself. And the audio doesn't change in pitch, it just changes in speed. So it's very, very cool. I'm going to go ahead and set it back to 120, which is where we started. Once again, you can always click on something and type in a value. So let's go ahead and stop. And that is it. That's how we record along with our song, which I will send you these tracks here usually. And then if you record something that you want my input on, you would record them out and send me those tracks. Okay, the only other thing that we should talk about is files and how to transfer those. That's a different subject, so we're going to make that a different video. So we are done for now.